That morning, my mother lowered the window of her new Porsche, waving like it was a trophy right before my stepfather drove his elbow into my ribs. About the vow renewal, she whispered, eyeing me in the rearview mirror. You'll come say your piece to the board, won't you? She didn't know I'd found the $640,000 slush fund flowing through his shell company. I wasn't running. I was collecting every piece of evidence. And I had chosen their perfect HOA anniversary gala at the clubhouse as my stage. My name is Nora Vale, and on the last Saturday of my old life, the air in the garage tasted of high-octane gasoline and the aggressive cherry scent of Will Cleaner. It was a thick, humid morning in Riverbend Estates, Halberton, the kind of gated paradise where the air itself feels heavy with unspoken fines. Sunlight cut into sharp blades by the half-open garage door striped the polished concrete floor, illuminating a million dancing dust motes. On the metal shelves against the wall, bottles of wax and polish stood in neat, obsessive rows, soldiers guarding a suburban dream. The dream this morning was a sand-colored Porsche 911 Carrera, so new it still had the temporary paper license plate taped inside the rear window. It gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a monument to a life I didn't recognize as my mother's. My mother, Valerie, the HOA president everyone called Karen behind her back, sat in the driver's seat, the buttery leather sighing as she shifted. She lowered the tinted window with a faint electronic hum, her smile brittle, a carefully painted thing for public consumption. Nice Porsche, huh? She asked, her voice a little too loud in the enclosed space. She gestured with a perfectly manicured hand, her diamond rings catching the light. I could see the dealership's logo, a discreet silver sticker still clinging to the corner of the windshield, unpeeled. It was a prize she couldn't wait to claim. A shield made of German engineering. Before I could answer, the heavy side door to the house slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Rick Calder, my stepfather and HOA treasurer, filled the doorway. He was a man built of compressed anger and expensive polo shirts, and he moved with the predatory stillness of a shark circling the community pool. He pulled the main garage door down with a deafening rattle, plunging us into a dim, artificial twilight. The world shrank to the three of us and the gleaming car. Don't touch things that aren't your concern, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was low and dense, a physical weight in the air. He wasn't talking about the car. He moved past the Porsche, his reflection a dark smear on its polished flank. I was standing near my own 10-year-old Honda that looked like a dinghy next to his yacht. As he passed me, he didn't even break stride. His elbow shot out. A quick, brutal jab that landed square on my lower ribs. Pain white, hot and electric, exploded in my side. The air rushed out of my lungs in a silent gasp, my vision tunneling to a pinpoint of black. I instinctively wrapped an arm around my torso, doubling over, my forehead pressed against the cool metal of my Honda's roof. My knees threatened to buckle through the roaring in my ears. His voice was a hot whisper right next to my ear, his breath smelling of coffee and mint. You will keep your mouth shut about portcullis partners. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact, a command written into my nerve endings. He straightened up, smoothing the front of his silk polo shirt as if brushing away a piece of lint. To anyone watching, it would have looked like nothing. A stumble, a clumsy moment. But the agony blooming in my side was real. A deep foundational ache that promised to blossom into a spectacular bruise. From inside the Porsche, Valerie's voice floated out, detached, impossibly serene. She hadn't seen or she had chosen not to. Cocktails are this afternoon, Nora. The pre-vow renewal reception at North Lake Heights. You will be there, won't you? She was looking at her phone, her thumb scrolling through a feed of what I imagined were floral arrangements and guest lists. The blue light of the screen cast an eerie corpse-like glow on her face. Her world was contained in that glowing rectangle, A world where inconvenient truths like her husband's casual brutality did not exist. The contrast was dizzying, the sharp specific pain in my side and her vague social planning. My hand, slick with sweat, fumbled the ceramic coffee mug I was holding. It slipped from my grasp, hitting the concrete with a sickening crack. The sound was small, but final. Hot coffee splashed across my shoes, and a dark brown blot spread across the gray floor. A stain that couldn't be wiped away. The image of the spreading stain hit me with the force of a second blow. It was the audit email 2 weeks ago from a junior accountant in compliance. A kid too new to know which stones to leave unturned. Subject line: Urgent invoice discrepancy. Portcullis Partners. Project Aegis. It had landed in my inbox with a high importance flag. A red exclamation point that screamed for attention. I had opened it and the world had tilted on its axis. Falsified serial numbers, astronomical emergency repair fees, a shell company registered to a P.O. box, a company I now knew belonged to the man adjusting his cuff links a few feet away from me. I had forwarded it up the chain of command, and it had vanished into a black hole of corporate silence. The audit email no one dared to read. Rick glanced down at the shattered mug at my feet, his lip curling in disdain. He shot his cuffs, revealing a pair of gold links shaped like bulls' heads. A gift from my mother. Don't ruin their vow renewal day, Nora, he said, his voice now calm, paternal, the voice of a man utterly in control. Especially when you owe your HOA president an apology for making waves. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, it was almost impressive. I was the problem. My questions were the issue, not his blatant fraud. I was making waves in his dirty little pond. I straightened up slowly, biting the inside of my cheek to keep from crying out. The sharp coppery taste of my own blood filled my mouth. It was grounding, real. I ignored him, turning my back on both of them. I walked to the trunk of my Honda, my movement stiff, each breath a careful negotiation with the fire in my ribs. I popped the trunk, lifted the worn carpet liner, and retrieved the small digital voice recorder I'd bought 2 months ago. It was no bigger than my thumb, a tiny piece of plastic and circuits that held my entire future. I palmed it, its metallic coolness a small comfort against my skin. About the vow renewal, Valerie said again, and this time there was a tremor of steel in her voice. She had finally put her phone down and was looking at me, her eyes wide and pleading. It wasn't a plea for my safety or my well-being. It was a plea for her own comfort, for the preservation of her perfect sand-colored world. Nora, do not embarrass me. Her shame was not for my pain, but for the possibility that I might show it to the world, that I might crack the flawless veneer of their HOA empire. I closed the trunk with a soft click. I turned to face them, the recorder nestled securely in my hand. I forced my lips into a smile, cold, sharp thing that felt alien on my face. I looked past Rick, directly at my mother, sitting cocooned in her leather and steel cage. I let her see the smile, let her interpret it as compliance, as surrender. I gave a small, slow nod. Of course not, Mom, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the pain or the rage that was a hurricane inside me. I'll be there, and I'll say exactly what needs to be said in front of everyone who needs to hear it. Riverbend Estates HOA resides in the glossy pages of every real estate brochure that promises peaceful living with pride. It's a place where ambition goes to get a mortgage and a citation for the wrong shade of mulch. I'm a senior compliance analyst on the management side, which means my job is to be the institutional conscience that everyone wants to silence. I verify the numbers, check the contracts, and ensure the vendors we pay are actual legitimate entities and not, say, a P.O. box in a strip mall. The air inside the HOA office is always the same temperature, recycled and sterile, smelling faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. You badge in through a series of glass gates that hiss open and closed like pneumatic lungs. A daily reminder that you are either inside or out, compliant or a threat. My vice president is Brad Lantern. Brad is a man who speaks exclusively in upbeat corporate aphorisms and wears suits that cost more than my first car. To your face, he's maple syrup sweet, smooth, and pours on the praise. Great work on that landscaping RFP, Nora. You're a rock star, he'd say in the hallway, clapping me on the shoulder with just enough force to be unsettling. But behind your back, you knew he was all nails and rust. I'd seen the emails he'd accidentally copied people on, the brutal Slack DMs that would flay an employee for a minor oversight. He cultivated an environment of performative positivity built on a bedrock of pure fear. He was the perfect HOA soldier, and I was a problem he was still figuring out how to solve. The problem specifically was a project codenamed Aegis. It was an emergency services contract, a rush job to acquire and deploy critical community upgrades for the new gates, pool renovation, and security lighting initiative. The timeline was impossible. The budget was nebulous. And the sole source vendor selected without a competitive bid was a new firm called Portcullis Partners. They appeared out of thin air, fully approved by the executive level before the ink was even dry on the project charter. My job was simply to process their invoices, a rubber stamp on a freight train of money leaving the association. The first invoice was for $120,000. The second was for $180,000. It was the third one for $210,000 where I found it buried in the line item manifest for 50 server rack-mounted security cameras. I saw duplicate serial numbers, 3 of them identical down to the last digit, each billed at $250,000. It was a sloppy, arrogant mistake. Then I saw the ancillary charges, a line item for emergency triage fee that had increased by 480% overnight, justified in a vague footnote as a response to a supposed citywide power surge, the blackout, as they called it, that I could find no record of. The numbers didn't just feel wrong. They felt mocking. They were so brazen. They were practically a confession. I flagged it, sending a polite, professionally worded email to Brad. His response came not as an email, but as a shadow falling over my cubicle. He leaned against the partition, all casual charm and veiled threat. "Hey, rockstar," he began, not looking at my screen, but at me. "Just saw your flag on the Portcullis invoice. We need to move on that. The board is all about speed and execution on Aegis." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were scanning my desk, my monitors, looking for signs of dissent. "This is a high-visibility win. Just sign it off, Nora. Let's get it done." "I just have a few standard due diligence questions first," I said, keeping my voice level. The bruise on my ribs throbbed in time with my pulse. "I need to see their SOC2 compliance report, get a confirmation on their EIN from the IRS database. And for a vendor this size, we require a list of beneficial owners. It's standard procedure for any new partner over 100,000. Brad's smile tightened by a millimeter. "We're past that. This was fast-tracked from the top. We're in a synergy phase, not a red tape phase." He pushed off the wall. "Be a team player, Nora. Don't be the anchor when we're trying to fly." An hour later, I was removed from the project's primary Slack channel. The calendar invite for the weekly Aegis progress meeting vanished from my Outlook. I had been ghosted professionally. I was no longer a rock star. I was an anchor. 2 days of silence followed. I was given tedious, mind-numbing work, reconciling expense reports from the sales team, corporate timeout. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, a message popped up in my Slack from a user I didn't recognize. A generic name with no profile picture. The message was a single cryptic line: Calder, Portcullis. Check the Gray County Registry. And then a moment later, this user has been deactivated. It was gone. A ghost in the machine. But it was enough. That night, I stayed late, long after the floor had emptied, and the only sound was the hum of the servers and the distant siren of a city I couldn't see. I dove into the association's travel and expense database. A digital archive of every flight, every hotel, every catered lunch. I searched for Rick's name, not as an employee, but as a guest. He was often a guest of the association, a consultant on various projects. I cross-referenced his travel dates with the Portcullis Incorporation filings I'd pulled from the Gray County Public Records site. And then I found it, an expense report from Brad for a site visit 3 months ago. The line item was for a warehouse rental in an industrial park on the outskirts of the county. Attached to the expense as proof of the visit was a photo. It was grainy, taken on a phone, but it was unmistakable. There was Rick, smiling, a proprietary hand on a stack of cardboard boxes. He was standing next to Brad, who had his arm slung around my stepfather's shoulders, and on the cinder block wall behind them, slightly out of focus, was a piece of paper printed on a cheap office printer and taped to the wall. It read, Portcullis Partners, Logistics Receiving. The world narrowed to that image. The casual smile on Rick's face, the temporary flimsy sign. It was all a lie. A $640,000 lie. And my mother's new Porsche was just a down payment. The air left my lungs again, just as it had in the garage. A silent, painful rush. This wasn't just corporate malfeasance. This was a violation that cut to the bone. A betrayal that had been happening right in front of me, funded by every homeowner's monthly dues. The final piece clicked into place the next morning. A calendar invitation from Brad appeared in my inbox. It was ostentatiously cheerful. Subject, come celebrate. A toast to the success of Project Aegis. The body of the invite was full of exclamation points and corporate buzzwords about synergy and achievement. The location was the North Lake Heights Country Club. The date was this Saturday. The time was 5 p.m. I looked at the stiff cream-colored Vow Renewal invitation that was stuck to my monitor with a piece of tape. The one for my mother and Rick's anniversary celebration. The ceremony was at 4 p.m. The reception, also at the North Lake Heights Country Club, was to begin at 5 p.m. The main benefactor of the event, the man whose daughter was getting married in a side ceremony, was also a majority shareholder in the HOA management firm and a powerful member of the board. It wasn't a separate event. It was the same event. The corporate celebration was a cover, a way to legitimize the presence of HOA employees at the vow renewal of their silent, fraudulent partner. That night, sitting at my kitchen table, the city lights a cold, distant glitter outside my window, I began to build my weapon. I opened my personal laptop and created a new encrypted folder one by one. I dragged the files in, the scanned invoices with the highlighted duplicate serial numbers, screenshots of Brad's Slack messages pressuring me to sign off, the public record of Portcullis Partners LLC showing a registered address that was nothing more than a mailbox, the grainy photo of Rick and Brad in the fake warehouse, the audio file from the small recorder I'd clicked on in my pocket just as Rick threatened me in the garage. Every piece of data was a brick. Every email a line of code in the program I was writing. When I had gathered it all, I selected every file, my hands steady, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. I right-clicked. A menu appeared. I moved the cursor down to compress. A dialog box asked for a name. I typed it out letter by letter. A small cruel smile touching my lips for the first time in days. Wedding confetti. Zip. Valerie married Rick when I was 18, the summer before I was supposed to leave for college. I remember the day he told me about my education fund. We were on the new patio he had built, the flagstones still smelling of wet stone and the promise of a future I thought was mine. He swirled the amber liquid in a heavy glass, the ice clinking a cheerful, oblivious rhythm. Valerie sat beside him, not looking at me. Her focus on the perfect concentric rings of condensation her own glass was leaving on the teak table. "There's been a hiccup with the market, Nora," Rick had said, his voice soaked in a kind of regret that cost him nothing. "Your mother and I made an investment on your behalf. A sure thing, but it seems the timing was off. The fund is, well, it's gone. Gone." A word so small for something so vast. My future, the dorm room I'd already picked out, the course catalog I'd filled with notes, the 4 years of distance I had been counting on. All of it just gone. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to protest, to rage, to show any sign that the bottom had just fallen out of my world as well as hers. She just traced the wet circle on the table with her fingernail. "It's a shame, honey," she'd whispered. "Rick feels just terrible about it." And that was it. The conversation was over. My future had been liquidated to fund their present, and my grief was an inconvenience to their narrative of HOA success. That was when Rick's discipline began. It was never a punch, never a slap, never anything that would leave a visible mark for the world to see and question. It was a language of quiet violence, a hand that would clamp down on my wrist in the middle of a sentence, his fingers finding the delicate bones, his thumb pressing into the nerve until my vision swam with little black dots. His grip was always accompanied by a low murmur, his voice a vibration against my skin. "We don't talk about money in this house, do we? It's vulgar." Or if I tried to argue with my mother, he'd corner me in the hallway, his body blocking the exit, not touching me but for the one hand that would grip my upper arm, tight enough to cut off the circulation. "You need to learn to respect your mother," he'd breathe, his voice reasonable, his grip a declaration of war. "Don't you dare make Valerie lose face." I learned that a threat doesn't have to be shouted to be heard. The most terrifying ones are whispered. Valerie, my mother, lives by a simple, unshakable creed. Status is a fortress. Inside its walls, you are safe from the ugliness of the world. She believes this with the fervor of a religious convert. To her, a brand new Porsche isn't a luxury. It's a statement of faith. It is proof that the walls are high, the gates are secure, and nothing bad can get in. My pain, my lost future, my silent struggles, these were cracks in the fortress wall, and she learned to plaster over them with denial and expensive handbags. She didn't see Rick's quiet brutalities because she couldn't afford to. Acknowledging them would mean acknowledging that the man she chose for her security was, in fact, the greatest threat within the walls. And so, she chose the car. She chose the belief. I didn't break. I didn't run. I got a job working the evening shift at the Halberton Public Library, shelving books in the hushed quiet of the reference section while my friends were at frat parties. I was breathing in the scent of aging paper and dust, my world shrinking to the Dewey Decimal System and the low hum of the fluorescent lights. I used my employee access to the university databases and taught myself contract finance. I read case studies on corporate fraud, learned about forensic accounting, and memorized the regulations on beneficial ownership. I built my own education in the silence, one textbook at a time. I was forging my own key, not to their fortress, but to a weapon I didn't even know I was building yet. Years passed. I got the job at Northbridge HOA Services. I moved out. I built a life that was mine, a quiet, orderly life where every transaction was accounted for. And then 6 months ago, an invoice landed on my desk. Project Aegis. Vendor, Portcullis Partners. The name meant nothing to me at first. It was just another line item, another vendor to be vetted. But as I read the proposal, a strange cold dread began to seep into my bones. The language was Rick's, all aggressive empty buzzwords like synergy and proactive solutions. The fee structure was obscenely inflated. And when I ran the preliminary background check, and it came back linked to a P.O. box in a strip mall I knew he frequented. My heart didn't just go cold. It stopped. It was a physical sensation, a seizing in my chest so intense I had to grip the edge of my desk. The air in the climate-controlled office suddenly felt thin, unbreathable. It was him. After all these years, the monster from inside the house had followed me to work. I remember that evening after seeing the invoice. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage and my phone rang. It was Rick. His voice was smooth as velvet. "Just heard you're handling some of our paperwork at Northbridge," he said casually, as if discussing the weather. "Valerie is so proud of you. We both are. Just remember what's important. Nora, family, loyalty. We're all on the same team here." And then the old refrain, the one that was the bedrock of our family's dynamic. "Don't do anything that would make your mother lose face." That was the moment I stopped being silent. I didn't hang up. I didn't argue. I just sat there listening. And when the call was over, I drove to an electronics store and bought the first of several digital voice recorders. I learned that the only way to fight a man who deals in whispers is to capture them. I began to record everything. The sound of his car pulling into the driveway when I was visiting, the tone of his voice on the phone, the way he would tap on my door before entering. I built an archive of his presence, a library of his quiet intimidation, which brings me to now, the Vow Renewal, this opulent, ridiculous farce at the North Lake Heights Country Club. It's not just a family event. It's a victory lap. The groom's father, a man I've never met, is the chairman of the private equity fund that bailed out Project Aegis when my initial questions started raising flags internally. He's a board member at Northbridge. This vow renewal isn't a union of two people. It's a merger. It's a celebration of a successful conspiracy, a party for the men who got rich. Disguised as a family event, it is the perfect mask. I stand in front of the full-length mirror in my small apartment bedroom. The dress is a deep navy blue, simple, elegant, and forgettable. I reach into my jewelry box, bypassing the earrings and necklaces, and pick up the small custom-made lapel pin I had designed. It looks like a small silver flower, innocuous, but inside the delicate petals sits a high-fidelity microphone, this wire thinner than a thread. I carefully fasten it to the collar of my dress. My back is still a canvas of radiating pain from where Rick's elbow connected with my ribs this morning. The dull ache is a constant grounding reminder. It's my compass. Keeps my rage cold and sharp. I turn to my laptop, which is open on my bed. The screen is a blank document, the cursor blinking patiently. For the last 2 weeks, I have been composing my speech. Not the one Brad wants me to give, full of praise for the procurement team. My real speech isn't a speech at all. It's a series of questions, 9 of them. Each one is a perfectly crafted explosive designed to detonate in a room full of complicit executives. They are questions that any director of compliance, any board member, any shareholder would be legally and ethically obligated to find the answer to. They are questions about duplicate serial numbers, about emergency fees, about beneficial ownership and undeclared conflicts of interest. They are questions that have no innocent answers. And I have the answer to every single one of them, neatly packaged and waiting in a folder on my desktop. I read the 9 questions one last time, my lips moving silently. Then I closed the laptop. It's time to go to the vow renewal. The evidence wasn't a single document. It was a constellation of digital ghosts, each one telling a piece of the same ugly story. I built the case file on a sandboxed laptop disconnected from the Northbridge network in the sterile silence of my apartment. The numbers didn't just speak. They screamed. Fact 1. Separate invoices from Portcullis Partners totaling $640,200 all claim to include the same 3 high-value, premium security cameras. Identical serial numbers. A rookie mistake born of pure arrogance. But the numbers alone weren't enough. So I cross-referenced them with the photo from Brad's expense report. The photo of Rick and Brad in the warehouse. I zoomed in pixel by pixel until the image dissolved into a mosaic of colored squares. In the background, past Rick's smiling face, were the stacks of boxes. They weren't from the security supplier. The logo was for a cheap office furniture company. And behind the boxes, nothing. Empty space.
Bare concrete walls.
He wasn't standing in a stocked warehouse ready for deployment. He was standing on a stage, a set designed for a single photograph. They hadn't just inflated the invoices. They had billed for inventory that did not exist. Fact 2. The employer identification number for Portcullis Partners. Every legitimate business has one. Theirs looked real. Passed the initial sniff test. But when I ran it through a deep dive business registry search, a subscription I paid for myself, I found its origin. The EIN was not registered to a corporate headquarters or logistics hub. It was registered to a mailbox. Mailbox 247 at the Penwick Strip Mall.
Assad.
Sun-bleached plaza with a laundromat, a dollar store, and a nail salon that was perpetually going out of business. I used a satellite view to look at it. I could see the row of bronze mailboxes through the dusty glass front of the mail services store, a $640,000 corporation that lived in a 6x 12-inch metal box. Fact 3. The layers of ownership. A shell company is standard for this kind of fraud. But Rick was more careful. Portcullis Partners LLC was listed as being owned by another entity, a holding company. When I pulled the incorporation documents for that company, I found the name R. Calder Holdings LLC. It was a shell wrapped in a shell, the signatory on the bank accounts, the name on the official state registration. The man who received the checks from the HOA was him. R. Calder. He hadn't even bothered to be creative. He had hidden in plain sight, burying his name under one layer of corporate jargon, confident that no one would ever bother to dig. Fact 4. The certificate of insurance. A COI is standard. Proves a vendor has liability coverage. The one Portcullis provided looked professional. It was a PDF, clean and official, but it felt too clean. I ran the file through a metadata analyzer. The digital guts of the document told a different story than its polished surface. The PDF wasn't created by an insurance underwriter. It was created in Adobe Photoshop. The analyzer gave me the exact version of the software. It also gave me a timestamp. Last modified 2:04 a.m. I could picture it perfectly. One of them, probably Brad, hunched over a laptop in the dead of night. His face lit by the glow of the screen, clumsily pasting a logo onto a forged document, convinced of his own genius. They were so busy building their empire, they never thought to check the digital footprints they were leaving in the mud. Fact 5. Brad's own words. After I was removed from the project, I kept my access to the general division-wide Slack channels. I set up an alert for the keyword Portcullis. Late one night, pinged. It was a conversation in a public channel, a discussion about reassigning project workloads. A junior manager asked why my projects were being shifted. Brad's reply was instant, casual, and utterly damning. Nora's digging into things that are already settled. Just move her off the chain for Aegis. We need someone who can see the big picture. He was talking about me. I was a problem to be managed, a cog to be removed from the machine. I took a screenshot, the timestamp, the channel name, his profile picture. It was all there. A perfect self-contained confession of his intent to obstruct. I saved the image. It was cold. Hard proof of his conspiracy. Fact 6. The corporate seal of approval. I found the minutes from the executive oversight meeting where the Portcullis contract was approved. They were buried on the company intranet in a folder no one ever looked at. There it was in black and white. Due to the operational urgency of Project Aegis, The standard third-party vendor audit protocol is hereby waived. A multi-$100,000 contract fast-tracked with no oversight. It was a license to steal. And at the bottom of the resolution, a crisp digital signature. Brad Lantern, VP of Procurement. He hadn't just enabled Rick's fraud. He had used his corporate authority to dismantle the very safeguards that were supposed to prevent it. Fact 7. Rick's voice. The audio file from the garage was pristine. I had noise-canceled his words. You will keep your mouth shut about Portcullis Partners. It was a command, a threat, but it was his other call, the one he made to my personal cell phone, that was the most chilling. The call where he told me they were a team. We're family, Nora. His voice so rich and reasonable, echoed in my headphones. And family protects each other. It was the voice of a master manipulator rapping a threat in the language of love. I saved the WAV file, his hypocrisy captured in a digital waveform. I took all of it, the annotated screenshots, the audio files, the metadata reports, a concise 2-page summary of the fraud, and I zipped it into the folder I had already named. I sent it from an anonymous encrypted email account to the General Counsel of Northbridge. I tried the official channel. I gave the system a chance to police itself. The response came 12 minutes later. It was an automated reply. Thank you for your message. Your submission has been received and will be reviewed in the order it was received. Our current response time is 10 to 15 business days. The fortress had its walls up. They were too high to climb. So, plan B. If I couldn't get the evidence through the door, I would project it onto the walls for everyone to see. The Vow Renewal wasn't just a stage. It was the perfect screen. The AV system at North Lake Heights was state-of-the-art, designed for corporate presentations. I had already done the reconnaissance. It ran on a simple plug-and-play network. A single USB stick was all I would need. But there was still one thing missing. One final piece to lock it all down. The fraud was digital. But the crime had a physical location. The warehouse. The empty warehouse. If I could get inside. If I could take a time-stamped video of the empty shelves on the day the final invoice was paid, the case would be airtight. Undeniable. I needed the key. I knew Rick wouldn't have it. He was too important for that. Brad might, but getting it from him was impossible. Then I remembered the photo. The arms slung around Rick's shoulders. The casual, comfortable camaraderie. There was someone else who frequented the warehouse. Someone who saw it as just another part of the job. A person who wouldn't think twice about the key in their possession. It was his executive assistant, a young woman who worshipped him, who managed his calendar, booked his travel, and I was willing to bet ran all his dirty little errands. I knew her name, and I knew exactly where she would be an hour before the vow renewal. The text message from Valerie arrived 2 hours before the ceremony. A little ping of digital coercion. Darling, can you come a bit early? I need help arranging the seating cards for the Portcullis people. You know them best. See you soon. Zoxo. Mom. The casual cruelty of it was almost breathtaking. You know them best. It wasn't a request. It was a test. A summon to perform my role as the compliant daughter. To physically arrange the names of the phantom company that had hollowed out my own neighborhood. I typed back a single cheerful word. Of course. I arrived at North Lake Heights Country Club an hour and a half early, bypassing the grand flower-choked entrance to the main ballroom and heading for the administrative offices in the West Wing. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and hairspray. I found the events manager, a harried-looking woman named Cynthia, whose name I knew from the reconnaissance I'd done 2 weeks prior. Back then, I was Sarah Jennings, a freelance event planner inquiring on behalf of a wealthy client. Today, I was Nora Vale, employee and family member. I gave her a warm conspiratorial smile. Cynthia, hi, it's Nora Vale, Valerie Calder's daughter. You are a miracle worker. This place looks incredible. She smiled, her shoulders dropping an inch from her ears. Thank you. We're so thrilled to host Valerie and Rick's special day. Listen, I said, lowering my voice. I have a tiny last-minute favor. My boss, Brad Lantern, has asked me to say a few words about our team during the reception. He sent me the PowerPoint, but my laptop just died. Is there any way I could get the password for the AV system in the ballroom? I have it on a thumb drive. It would save my life. I held up the small USB stick, a tiny black rectangle that held all the thunder and lightning I was about to unleash. Oh, of course. Honey, she said, already typing at her desk. We get that all the time. The password for today's event is Lakeside 25. The exclamation point is important. The tech booth is at the back of the ballroom up the little staircase. Just tell the tech. Andre, that Cynthia sent you. You are a lifesaver, I said, meaning it more than she could ever know. As I walked toward the ballroom, my phone buzzed with a Slack direct message. It was from Brad. The message was accompanied by a smiling face with sunglasses emoji. Hey, rockstar. Ready for your big speech tonight? Just a quick heartfelt toast to the procurement team and our amazing partners. Keep it light and positive. You're going to kill it. He thought he was being clever by putting me on stage. He was forcing my public allegiance. If the person who had raised the initial flags, stood up and praised the project, my credibility would be shot. It was a checkmate move in his mind. I smiled as I typed my reply, my thumbs flying across the screen. Of course, Brad, looking forward to it. I even have a few thank you slides prepared to show everyone how much we appreciate their partnership. I hit send. The trap was now set on both sides. The grand ballroom was a cathedral of beige and gold, dominated by a massive crystal chandelier that dripped light onto dozens of round tables draped in white linen. At the far end, the wedding party was doing a rehearsal. I could see Rick standing at the altar, looking regal and proprietary in his tuxedo. He caught my eye and gestured for me to come over. As I approached, he broke away from the group and met me on the dance floor, his arms open wide. He enveloped me in a hug that was purely for the benefit of the onlookers, a public display of paternal affection. He smelled of expensive cologne and self-satisfaction. He kept one arm draped heavily over my shoulders. Family, he said, his voice a low rumble meant only for me. See, this is what it's all about. Everyone coming together. I didn't pull away. I leaned into the suffocating embrace and smiled up at him. A bright, brittle thing. And paperwork? I said softly, my voice light as air. It's so important to have all the paperwork in order for big family events like this. I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes, a momentary glitch in his polished facade. Before he dismissed it, he squeezed my shoulder, a gesture that was half affection, half warning, and turned back to the rehearsal. I slipped away, making my way to the back of the enormous room. The tech booth was a small, dark space overlooking the ballroom, filled with the glow of monitors and the quiet hum of cooling fans. A young man with headphones around his neck looked up as I entered. Can I help you? Andre. Cynthia sent me up, I said, projecting an air of frazzled last-minute panic. I'm Nora Vale, and I just need to load a quick presentation for my boss. No problem, he said, gesturing to a laptop connected to a formidable-looking control board. Just pop your drive in there. What's the file name? It's called Thank You Partners PTX, I said, plugging in the USB stick. I navigated to the file and opened it. The first slide I had created appeared on the screen. It was a simple, elegant design with the Northbridge HOA Services logo and the Portcullis Partners logo side by side over a tasteful stock photo of a handshake. Andre glanced at it and nodded. Looks good. When do you want this to run? This was the critical part. My boss is a little dramatic, I said with an eye roll. He wants it to start automatically. Right when the MC introduces me, I'll be using the handheld wireless microphone, the one with the blue tape on the bottom. Can you link the presentation to that specific mix audio signal? So, when it goes live, slide 1 just appears on the main screen. Andre shrugged. Sure. Weird request, but easy enough. He clicked a few buttons, his fingers dancing across a control panel. Okay, you're all set. The file is cached. When mic 7 goes live, the slideshow starts. It will auto-advance every 15 seconds. Perfect, I said, my heart hammering against the bruise on my ribs. I removed the USB drive and slipped it into my purse. You've saved my career, he just grunted in response, his attention already back on a bank of monitors. I walked back down into the golden light of the ballroom. Guests were starting to arrive, a river of silk and dark suits. I saw my mother near the entrance, a vision in champagne-colored lace, her smile fixed and radiant. She saw me and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She glided over to me, her hand finding my arm, her fingers gripping me with surprising strength. Nora, she whispered, her eyes darting around the room. You look lovely. Just remember what we talked about. Tonight is important. Don't embarrass me. It was the same plea as in the garage, but now it was laced with the desperation of a general surveying a battlefield on the verge of victory. I looked into her eyes, seeing not a mother, but a stranger who had made a series of choices that had led us to this exact moment. I gently placed my free hand over hers, my touch cool and steady. You chose a beautiful car. Mom, I said softly. Her brow furrowed in confusion, trying to parse the meaning of the non sequitur. I didn't give her time to understand. I simply squeezed her hand back, a gesture of finality, and walked away toward the stage. The ceremony was a blur. The vows were exchanged. The rings were placed on fingers. The kiss was performed to a smattering of polite applause. It was all a prelude, the overture before the opera. During the cocktail hour, I nursed a single glass of club soda, the ice a cold knot in my stomach. Finally, the guests were seated for dinner. The MC, a man with a booming voice and a plastic smile, took the stage. After a few tired jokes, he looked down at his notes. And now to offer a toast on behalf of a key strategic partner. Please welcome to the stage the Senior Compliance Analyst from Northbridge HOA Services, MS. Nora Valli. A single spotlight found me at my table, pinning me in a circle of white, unforgiving light. A polite ripple of applause spread through the room. I stood up, my knees feeling strangely disconnected from my body. I walked toward the stage, each step a deliberate, measured beat in the final countdown. As I climbed the 3 short steps, I could feel hundreds of eyes on me. I saw Brad at a front table giving me an encouraging thumbs up, a smug little smile playing on his lips. I saw Rick sitting next to my mother looking proud, expansive, the king in his court. I saw my mother, her hands clasped in her lap, her expression a fragile mask of hope. I reached the podium. An attendant handed me the wireless microphone. I saw the small strip of blue tape at its base. My fingers closed around it. It was cool and solid in my hand. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of expensive perfume and roasted chicken. I looked out into the crowd, letting my eyes sweep across their expectant faces. The spotlight was hot on my face, and I knew it was illuminating the faint yellowing edges of the bruise that no amount of concealer could fully hide. I brought the microphone to my lips. The microphone went live and the rain began. The click of the microphone going live was a sound no one heard, but its effect was instantaneous and absolute. Behind me, the 2 massive projector screens flanking the stage, which had been displaying a tasteful looping monogram of the happy couple, went black for a single heart-stopping beat. Then they flickered to life. Slide 1 appeared. It was exactly what everyone expected. clean corporate branding. On the left, the familiar solid logo of Northbridge HOA Services. On the right, the stylized gate of Portcullis Partners. Between them, in a clean sans serif font, were the words, "Thank you for believing in speed." I saw Brad at the head table give a satisfied nod. Rick leaned over and whispered something in my mother's ear, and she smiled, a genuine relieved smile. The room was bathed in the slide's calm professional blue glow. I said nothing. I let the silence hang in the air. I held my breath. The automatic timer was counting down. 15 seconds. The screen went black again. And then the second slide slammed into view. The tone shifted instantly. It was a stark black and white image. A scan of a document. 3 documents, to be precise, arranged side by side. They were invoices. Even from the back of the room, the bold red circles I had drawn were brutally clear, highlighting 3 identical 16-digit serial numbers on each separate bill. A low murmur rippled through the room. A wave of sound starting from the tables filled with Northbridge executives and spreading outward. It was the sound of 100 quiet questions being asked at once. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Conversations faltered. The quiet professional hum of the room had been broken. Brad's smile was gone, replaced by a tight, confused frown. He was looking from the screen to me, his brain trying to solve an equation that didn't make sense. I remained silent. The clock ticked. Slide 3. The image was a screenshot from a public records database. The page for Portcullis Partners LLC. Next to it, I had placed a crisp, high-resolution photo of the Penwick Strip Mall. A depressing vista of cracked asphalt and faded storefronts. A thick red arrow pointed from the official registered address on the screen to the grimy front window of Postal Plus, nestled between a laundromat and a vape shop. The murmur in the room grew louder, laced now with whispers of disbelief. This wasn't just a clerical error. This was something else. This was wrong. At a table near the front, a man I didn't know laughed. A short, sharp bark of a sound, as if he couldn't help himself. Brad was no longer looking at me. He was staring at the screen, his knuckles white where he gripped the tablecloth. Slide 4 crashed onto the screen, and the room fell into a deafening absolute silence. It was the photograph, the grainy, damning photo from Brad's own expense report. There they were, projected 20 feet high in glorious high-definition detail. Brad Lantern and Rick Calder, arms slung around each other, beaming like proud fathers. They were standing in the empty warehouse, the cheap printed-out Portcullis Partners sign taped to the cinderblock wall behind them. In the sudden, profound quiet, the sound of a champagne flute shattering on the marble floor was like a gunshot. Everyone flinched. I saw a waiter rush to a table where a woman was staring at the screen, her hand over her mouth, a dark stain of spilled wine spreading across the white linen in front of her. Rick had frozen. His hand, which had been resting on Valerie's shoulder, was still there, but it looked like a statue's hand, heavy and lifeless. He was staring at his own smiling face, a ghost from 3 months ago come to haunt his Vow Renewal feast. Then came the sound. There was no slide 5. There was only the sound of a hidden microphone and the hot, angry whisper of my stepfather's voice captured in the garage that very morning. "You will keep your mouth shut about Portcullis Partners." The audio was crystal clear, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. Rick's voice filled the entire ballroom, a venomous whisper that wrapped around every guest, every centerpiece, every crystal glass. It was intimate and brutal. The sound of a threat made in the dark, now dragged into the light. That was the breaking point. Brad shot out of his chair, knocking it over with a loud clatter. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice a raw, panicked shred of sound. "Somebody shut it off!" He scrambled toward the stage, his face a mask of pure terror. But as he reached the bottom step, 2 of the club's security guards, Large men in neat black suits stepped in front of him. They didn't touch him. They simply stood there, a human wall. One of them spoke into his wrist. Andre in the booth had followed my other instructions perfectly. The audio cut out. The screens went black. The spotlight on me remained, the only light in a room that had been plunged into a state of suspended animation. I lifted the microphone again. My voice, when I spoke, was low, calm, and perfectly clear. Every word was a stone dropped into a deep, silent well. The total amount paid to Northbridge HOA Services by Portcullis Partners for equipment that was never delivered and for services that were never rendered comes to $640,000. I saw Valerie. She had both hands over her mouth, her knuckles white, her eyes wide with a horror I had never seen in them before. They were pleading, "Stop, Nora. Please stop. Don't do this to me. Don't ruin this." But it was already ruined. It had been ruined the moment she chose the Porsche over her own daughter. The moment she decided the appearance of safety was more important than the real thing. Then a movement at the head table. The tall, silver-haired man stood up. He was the groom's father. He was the chairman of the private equity fund. He was a ranking member of the Northbridge Board of Directors. He didn't look at Rick. He didn't look at Brad. He looked directly at me, his face ashen, his expression grim and unreadable. His standing was a signal. The performance was over. The crime was now officially in progress. I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch until it was thin and screaming. I looked from the chairman to Brad, frozen at the foot of the stage, to Rick, who was now a wax figure in a tuxedo, and finally to my mother. I let my gaze rest on her for a final beat. Then I turned my attention back to the room at large, to the sea of shocked and silent faces. "So the question for tonight isn't just about congratulations," I said, my voice resonating with a cold final clarity. "It's a question of due diligence. This vow renewal, this celebration, who is marrying whom exactly? Is Northbridge HOA Services marrying Portcullis Partners, or is Portcullis Partners marrying our money?" In the ringing silence that followed my question, I didn't wait for an answer. I reached into my clutch, my movements economical and precise, and pulled out my personal cell phone. My thumb swiped across the screen, opening a single preloaded application, a secure encrypted conferencing line. I pressed the only button on the screen, initiate. This call was not a surprise to its recipients. My anonymous tip to the outside counsel, a law firm that specialized in corporate crisis management and had no loyalty to the current executive team, had included a simple instruction: be ready for an emergency board conference at 5:30 on Saturday. A link will be provided. The two massive screens behind me, which had been ominously black, flickered back to life. But instead of a corporate logo or a wedding monogram, they were bisected. On the left screen, the face of Julian Croft, the general counsel of Northbridge HOA Services, peered. He was in a study, a wall of leather-bound books behind him, his face a grim stony mask. On the right screen was Eleanor Vance, the independent chairman of the board, a woman known for her surgical precision in corporate governance. She was in what looked like a home office, her expression severe, her eyes missing nothing. The guests in the ballroom let out a collective gasp. This was no longer a vow renewal toast. It was a public arraignment. I held my phone up slightly, ensuring its microphone would capture my voice clearly for the conference line. "Mr. Croft, Madam Chairman," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence of the room. "Thank you for joining. You have an email in your inboxes from an anonymous source sent 72 minutes ago. The subject line is Evidence Package Project Aegis. The attachment is a password-protected zip file named weddingconfetti.zip. The password is the first word of our company's official mission statement." I saw Eleanor Vance glance at a secondary screen out of her camera's view, her fingers tapping. I will now provide a 90-second summary for the record. I continued, my pace quickening, each word a bullet point. Northbridge HOA Services has paid $640,000 to a vendor named Portcullis Partners. These payments were for non-existent inventory supported by at least 3 fraudulent invoices with duplicate serial numbers. Portcullis Partners is a shell company registered to a public mailbox. Its certificate of insurance was digitally forged in Photoshop at 2:04 a.m. The entire contract was approved with a waiver of the standard third-party audit. A waiver signed by Vice President Brad Lantern. Across the room, Brad finally broke from his paralysis. His face was slick with sweat, his eyes wide with the frantic terror of a cornered animal. He wasn't thinking about lawyers or lawsuits. He was thinking about the plug in the wall. He lunged away from the security guards, scrambling toward the thick black power conduit that snaked from the AV podium to a wall outlet. He was going to pull the plug to plunge the room into darkness and silence, but the guards were faster. Before his fingers could even touch the cable, one of them had his arm, not in a violent grip, but with an immovable, professional firmness. "Sir," the guard said, his voice a low, calm rumble. "I'm going to have to ask you to step back." Brad struggled for a moment, pathetic, desperate thrashing before all the fight went out of him. The guard held his arm and Brad just stood there panting, a broken man held in place by a polite request. On the screen, Eleanor Vance leaned forward. She had clearly finished her initial review. Her voice, amplified through the ballroom speakers, was like a shard of ice. "Freeze all pending and future payments to Portcullis Partners and any associated entities. Effective immediately. I want a confirmation from Treasury within 5 minutes." Julian Croft, the general counsel, spoke next, his eyes fixed on the pathetic scene with Brad at the side of the stage. His tone was surgical, stripped of all emotion. "Preserve all devices, Mr. Lantern, your corporate phone, your laptop, your personal devices. They are all now subject to a legal hold. Do not touch them. Do not delete anything. A team from my office is already on their way to you. Step away from the laptop on the podium now." Brad looked at the laptop as if it were a snake and stumbled backward, held upright only by the guard's steadying hand. The room was a tableau of shock. Waitstaff stood frozen with trays of food. Guests stared, their faces a mixture of horror and rapt attention. This was better than theater. This was the raw, brutal collapse of an empire happening in real time. I had one more piece of information to place on the record. I looked directly into the camera of my phone, ensuring the board members could see my face. "For the record," I said, my voice clear and unwavering, "the sole beneficial owner of the shell entity are Calder Holdings LLC, which owns and operates Portcullis Partners, is Mr. Rick Calder. This constitutes a massive undeclared conflict of interest and a direct violation of corporate policy and federal law." I lowered the phone. It was done. The mechanism was in motion, and it was now too big for anyone to stop. In the silence that followed, I heard a sound directly behind me, a ragged, desperate gasp for air. "Nora!" It was my mother's voice, a broken whisper that barely carried the length of the stage. It was a plea, a question, an accusation, all wrapped in a single shattered word. I felt her presence behind me, the warmth of her body, the scent of her perfume. I imagined her hand reaching out for me, her eyes begging me to turn around, to undo it, to take it all back and put the mask back on. I did not turn. I kept my eyes forward, looking out at the wreckage I had created. I stared at the face of the chairman on the screen, a silent acknowledgement that my part in this was over. And then the great double doors at the back of the ballroom swung silently inward. There was no announcement, no shout, just a sudden, shocking intrusion of the outside world. The soft golden light of the ballroom was sliced apart by the strobing, flashing pulses of red and blue. The lights of a police patrol car, then another, swept across the room, painting the shocked faces of the guests in frantic, alternating colors. They reflected off the crystal chandelier, turning it into a madly glittering disco ball of civic emergency. They danced across the marble floors and the pristine white tablecloths. The local Halberton police had arrived. Their presence a silent, undeniable confirmation that this was no longer a corporate matter. It was a crime scene. The flashing red and blue lights painted the room in a surreal, pulsating panic. But I wasn't finished. The corporate execution was complete. Now it was time for the personal one. While the first uniformed officers began to secure the ballroom entrance, I turned away from the podium and walked calmly to the head table, which was now an island of chaos in a sea of stunned silence. Rick was on his feet, his face a mottled canvas of purple and white, a vein throbbing in his temple. My mother was still seated, her hands clutching the table's edge as if it were a life raft in a hurricane. The chairman of the board, Mr. Vance, remained standing, a silent, powerful judge observing the proceedings. I ignored Rick. I walked directly to my mother and placed a single folded document on the table in front of her. It was a crisp legal-sized paper bearing the heavy emboss of a notary seal. "You'll want this, Mom," I said, my voice low and even. A private conversation in a very public room. She stared at the paper, uncomprehending. What is this?" "It's the addendum to your prenuptial agreement," I explained gently. "The one you signed last month from your lawyer friend who was so concerned about protecting your assets." That friend, of course, was an attorney I had hired, who had contacted Valerie under the guise of an old acquaintance from her garden club, offering some friendly, unsolicited advice. Rick's head snapped toward the document. He finally seemed to understand that the attack was coming from a new direction. "What the hell are you talking about?" he snarled. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on my mother, guiding her through the wreckage. Clause 4B. "Mom, do you remember the financial integrity clause? It stipulates that in the event your spouse is formally investigated for or charged with an act of financial fraud, all your pre-existing separate assets are immediately and irrevocably shielded from any legal or financial claim. Your inheritance from grandma, your personal investment portfolio, it's all firewalled, untouchable." A flicker of understanding, of desperate hope, sparked in Valerie's eyes. Rick, however, saw the trap. "You can't do that," he hissed. "Oh, but she already did," I said brightly. "A month ago." I then tapped a second paragraph on the page. "And then there's Clause 4C, the conditional gift provision. It states that any high-value gifts, defined as any single item over $100,000, transferred to you within the 90 days preceding a triggering event under Clause 4B are considered conditional transfers of property. Their ownership does not legally vest until after that 90-day period. If a triggering event occurs, the gift is subject to immediate recall by the lien holder or seller as a fraud-adjacent transfer under investigation." I paused, letting the legal jargon settle. "The Porsche, Mom, the Porsche is a conditional gift. You never actually owned it." From his position at the head of the table, Mr. Vance, the chairman, extended a hand. "May I?" he asked, his voice a low rumble of authority. I slid the document across the table to him. He held it up, his eyes scanning the text with practiced speed. After a moment, a small, almost imperceptible nod. He looked over at Julian Croft's face, still watching silently from the large screen. "Good clause," Vance stated simply. It was a verdict, as if on cue. A new sound cut through the tense atmosphere of the ballroom. It was not the siren of the police cars, but the high-pitched, insistent beeping of a large vehicle in reverse, followed by the unmistakable hydraulic groan and clank of a tow truck's winch cable. From the massive windows overlooking the country club's manicured entrance, the guests could see it. A gleaming flatbed tow truck from the most exclusive Porsche dealership in Halberton, its amber lights flashing in rhythm with the police cars red and blue. I had made the call an hour ago, providing the dealership's legal department with a copy of the addendum and the time of my presentation. They were, I had explained, very welcome to come and reclaim their collateral before it became entangled in a federal investigation. My mother began to tremble, a deep, uncontrollable shudder. The fortress walls were not just breached, they were being dismantled brick by brick, and the prize she thought was her ultimate security was being towed away like a common repossession. I reached into my clutch and took out the Porsche key, this weighted crest cool against my palm. I gently took her trembling hand and closed her fingers around it. "It's okay," I whispered, and for the first time, my voice was not cold. It was something else, something approaching pity. "You haven't lost anything that was truly yours." That was the final straw for Rick. With a roar of pure impotent rage, he lunged across the table, his hand outstretched, not for me, but for the document in Vance's hand. He was a beast trying to destroy the evidence of his own caging. But the club's security guard, the same one who had stopped Brad, was there in an instant, his body a solid wall between Rick and the chairman. He caught Rick's arm, his grip like iron. "Sir, I need you to remain calm," the guard said, his voice unchanging. Rick struggled. "A wild, cornered animal. Give me that. It's mine." "She has no right," he bellowed. He had forgotten in his fury about the microphone. The one I had used, the one I had left on the podium, its power light still glowing a steady, malevolent green. His frantic, desperate roars echoed through the ballroom. Every guest, every police officer, every board member on the screen hearing his self-incriminating rage. I stepped back from the table, putting myself in his line of sight. He stopped struggling, his chest heaving, his eyes locking on mine with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. This was the moment, the final sentence. I spoke clearly, my voice cutting through his heavy breathing, and the microphone carried my words to every corner of the room with perfect, devastating clarity. "You didn't just steal from the HOA, Rick," I said, my voice as sharp and straight as a scalpel's incision. "You stole my 18th year. You stole my education. You stole the future my father wanted for me. That $640,000 was just interest on a debt you've owed me for a very long time." A visible wave of motion went through the room. The guests, who had been leaning forward, captivated, now physically recoiled as if from a sudden blast of heat. They were not just watching a corporate takedown anymore. They were witnessing the brutal, intimate exorcism of a family's deepest poisons. It was too raw, too real. People looked away at their plates, at the ceiling, anywhere but at the scene unfolding at the head table.
I glänst over at Brad.
He was still standing by the stage, a ghost at his own execution. He was staring down at his phone, his face slack with a new kind of horror. From where I stood, I could see the notification on his screen, a bright red banner from his stock tracking app. Trading halt NBRS. The news was out. The bleeding had begun. On the massive screens, Eleanor Vance and Julian Croft shared a final grim look. Vance gave a short, sharp nod. Their faces vanished and the screens went black, plunging the room into the dim, chaotic lighting of the flashing police cars. The show was over. The board had seen enough. The only sound now, besides the low murmur of police radios, was the relentless mechanical groan of the winch from outside the windows. The sound of a heavy cable being pulled taut. The sound of my mother's beautiful sand-colored prize being dragged away into the night. The security guard still had Rick's arm, a pillar of calm against which my stepfather's world was breaking. The flashing lights from outside, had settled into a hypnotic silent rhythm sweeping across the room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air where champagne toasts should have been. The guests were statues. The police officers at the door were waiting, their presence a patient looming certainty. The air was thick, heavy, like the moment after a lightning strike, when the world holds its breath, waiting for the thunder. Then Rick did something I never expected. He laughed. It was not a sound of mirth or joy. It was a dry, rasping sound, like stones grinding together in a deep, empty cave. It was the sound of a man who had fallen so far, so fast, that the only thing left to do was to marvel at the absurdity of the impact. He looked at me, and his lips peeled back from his teeth in a grotesque imitation of a smile. The fury in his eyes had been burned away, replaced by a hollow, chilling condescension. "You really don't get it, do you?" he rasped, his voice, even without the microphone, carrying across the silent room. "This is how the world works. This is the game. Everyone does it. Everyone. The money just moves around. It's a current, and you either learn to swim with it or you drown." He shook his head, a gesture of profound pity, as if I were a child who had just broken her favorite toy out of ignorance. "This isn't about right and wrong. It's about power. It's about who has it and who doesn't. All this," he gestured vaguely with his free hand, "at the room, at the guests, at my mother, it's just a byproduct of that power. I was trying to give your mother a good life. I was trying to build something. You're just too stupid and self-righteous to understand." He believed it. In that final desperate moment, his ego had constructed a narrative where he was the master of a complex universe, and I was the fool who couldn't comprehend its majesty. He wasn't a common thief. He was a misunderstood philosopher of power. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached into the same clutch where I had kept my phone and pulled out the second device I had brought with me. It was not a sleek, modern piece of technology. It was an old digital voice recorder, a clunky plastic rectangle of a model from 10 years ago. It was scuffed and worn around the edges. It was the first one I had ever bought, the one I had used to record him in the early years. It was a relic of my long, patient education in his specific brand of evil. I held it up. The small red recording light was not on. I pressed the play button. The sound that emerged from the tiny speaker was not a whisper. It was Rick's voice, loud and boastful, thick with the slurring effect of expensive single malt scotch. The background was not silent. There was the distant, cheerful thwack of a golf club hitting a ball and the faint chirping of birds. The little prick from internal audit comes to me, all nervous, talking about discrepancies. Rick's recorded voice boomed, full of swagger. "So, I took him out to the club. We're on the 7th hole. I hand him a drink and I hand him an envelope with 10 grand in it. I tell him, some discrepancies are just the cost of doing business. You can either be the guy who understands that, or you can be the guy who spends the rest of his career auditing vending machine receipts in the basement." The recorded Rick let out a deep, rolling laugh, a sound of pure,
Untroublée corruption.
A new kind of silence fell over the room. It was deeper, heavier. I glanced into the crowd, and my eyes caught a man at a side table, a guest I didn't know. He was holding up his phone, streaming the entire event, and on his screen, I could see the clean white text of the auto-captioning software, transcribing Rick's every slurred, damning word for the entire digital world to see. 10 grand in it cost of doing business auditing vending machine receipts in the basement. The confession was being notarized in real time by 1,000 invisible witnesses. The room was no longer a private venue. It was a public record. My mother made a small wounded sound. She slowly, deliberately placed her hands flat on the white tablecloth. Her fingernails painted a pale bridal pink dug into the wood beneath the linen. leaving small crescent-shaped indentations. "That's enough. Rick," she whispered, her voice a thread of sound, so quiet I could barely hear it. But it was not a defense. It was a capitulation. It was the sound of a woman finally, irrevocably letting go. It was the sound of the fortress walls turning to dust. Rick heard her. He saw the final abandonment in her eyes. And for the very first time since I was 18 years old, I saw real fear on his face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't defiance. It was the raw primal terror of an apex predator who has just realized it is trapped. His bluster, his arrogance, his entire philosophy of power, it all evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out man in an expensive suit. He took a single, shuffling step backward, an involuntary retreat from the ghost of his own voice, from the wife who had just disowned him, from the daughter who had become his judge. I turned my gaze from him. He was a ghost now, a problem for other people to solve. My eyes found Brad. He was still standing by the stage, a statue of ruin, his face the color of wet cement. He was watching the police officers who were now beginning to move purposefully into the room. I looked directly at him. He flinched as my gaze landed on him. I didn't need the microphone. The room was so quiet. My normal speaking voice was perfectly clear. "You have a choice, Brad," I said, my tone flat, transactional. "Right now, in the next 10 seconds, you can be a cooperating witness for the prosecution, or you can be a co-defendant." His entire body seemed to deflate. His shoulders, which were always squared with manufactured confidence, slumped forward, his head bowed. The fight, the denial, the years of sycophantic striving had all drained out of him, leaving an empty husk. He turned his head slowly, not to me, but toward the nearest police officer, a man with a grim face and a thick mustache. Brad's voice, when it came, was a ragged, defeated croak. "I'll cooperate," he said to the officer. "I'll tell you everything." From the entrance of the ballroom, a new sound cut through the silence. It was a small metallic sound, but it was sharper and more final than a gunshot. It was the dry, ratcheting click of a pair of handcuffs being opened, then another as they were snapped shut. The sound of consequence. A man in a detective suit, his expression impassive, approached me. He didn't ask for my name. He already knew. "Ms. Vale," he said, his voice low and professional. "Do you have the evidence you mentioned?" I held out the small black USB stick, the sum total of my rage, my patience, and my pain, all contained in a tiny piece of plastic and silicon. "Everything is in here," I said. "Audio, documents, metadata analysis, it's all labeled." He took it from me without a word, his fingers closing around it. He dropped it into a small, clear plastic bag, sealed it, and initialed the seal. The transfer was complete. As he turned to leave, a sound from across the room made me look up. It was the bride, not my mother, the other bride, the young woman in the white dress whose wedding day this was supposed to be. She was standing by her table, her face streaked with tears, her hands clenched at her sides. Her new husband was trying to comfort her, his hand on her arm, but she was inconsolable. She wasn't crying for the ruined party or the shattered cake or the flowers that were already starting to wilt. She was crying for the truth, for the sheer brutal ugliness of it laid bare for everyone to see. Her tears were a testament, a final human confirmation of the devastation I had wrought. She was weeping for a world she had just discovered was built on a foundation of lies. I didn't wait to see the rest. The room was no longer my concern. It was a crime scene, a collapsed ecosystem, a problem for men in suits and men in uniforms to solve. I had done my work. I turned my back on the wreckage, on the shattered bride, on the defeated Brad, on the empty space where my mother's husband used to be a king, and I walked. I moved through the stunned crowd, a ghost passing through her own haunting. No one stopped me. No one spoke to me. They parted before me as if I were a vessel of some terrible, untouchable power. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out from the golden chaotic light of the ballroom onto the stone portico of the North Lake Heights Country Club. The night air was cool and clean. A fine misty rain was falling, the kind that doesn't soak you immediately, but clings to your skin and hair, washing the world clean. The air smelled of wet asphalt and damp earth. The flashing lights of the patrol cars were silent out here, but they were relentless, casting long, sweeping shadows that danced across the stone pillars and the manicured hedges. The red and blue strobes painted my simple navy dress in fleeting, violent colors. A man was waiting for me at the bottom of the wide stone steps. He was wearing a polo shirt with the Porsche dealership logo embroidered on the chest. He held a clipboard. He looked nervous, out of place amidst the police activity, but determined. He saw me and approached, his shoes making a soft, crunching sound on the gravel path. "Ms. Vale?" he asked, his voice hushed. I nodded. "We've secured the vehicle," he said. "All business. I just need your signature on the repossession receipt." He held out the clipboard. I took the pen he offered on the form. Under reason for repossession, a neat typed line read, "Conditional gift recall, fraud adjacent transfer." I signed my name on the indicated line. My signature was a steady, clean stroke of ink against the paper. He tore the carbon copy from the pad and handed it to me. It felt flimsy and insignificant in my hand. My mother appeared at the doorway, a silhouette against the chaos inside. She looked small and lost. She was holding the single Porsche key I had given her, clutching it in her hand like a holy relic. She walked toward me, her movement stiff and uncertain, a sleepwalker in a nightmare. She stopped in front of me, the misty rain beginning to bead on the shoulders of her expensive dress. Her eyes were blank, searching for an anchor, for something to make sense of the utter ruin of her perfect day. I took the flimsy receipt, folded it once, and placed it gently into her free hand, closing her fingers around the paper just as I had closed them around the key. She looked down at it, then back up at me, her expression a universe of unspoken, unanswerable questions. At that moment, the oak doors opened again. 2 uniformed officers emerged, and between them, his hands cuffed behind his back, was Rick. His tuxedo was rumpled, his face a slack, empty mask. He was looking at the ground, at his expensive polished shoes, at the gravel, anywhere but at the world he had just lost. They walked him directly past us, so close I could have reached out and touched him. He must have sensed me there because for a fraction of a second his head jerked up and his eyes, wild and empty,
met mine.
It was only for an instant. He couldn't hold my gaze. He looked away, a final reflexive act of cowardice. His power, his threats, his entire philosophy of the world, it had all collapsed into this single shabby moment of being led away in the rain. As he passed, I spoke. My voice not a whisper, not a shout, but a simple declarative statement of fact that cut through the night. "Your gift," I said, my words aimed at the back of his head. "I return it." My phone vibrated in my clutch. I pulled it out. It was a push notification from a secure app one had installed on the Northbridge General Counsel's recommendation. The message was 6 words long. A final beautiful epitaph. Portcullis payments frozen. All accounts locked. I looked down at the old clunky voice recorder still in my other hand. His purpose was served. His race was run. I popped open the small plastic cover on the back, slid out the 2 AA batteries, and let them drop into the palm of my hand. The device was dead now, just a hollow piece of plastic. I slipped the inert recorder and the batteries into my clutch. The night felt suddenly clean, finished, as neat and tidy as a perfectly balanced ledger. The heavy doors of the ballroom closed with a soft final thud, sealing the chaos inside. For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain and the distant murmur of a police radio. Then I heard it, a sound from inside. It started as a single distinct set of hands clapping. Then another joined, then a few more. It was a scattered, sporadic sound at first, uncertain, but it grew, gaining confidence and volume, spreading through the room like a fire. In seconds, it had swelled from a few isolated claps into a roaring, rolling wave of applause, a thunderous ovation that shook the very doors of the country club. It was the sound of 100 captive people suddenly set free. I didn't turn to acknowledge it. The applause was not for me. It was for the fall of the king. I turned my back on the closed doors, on the sound, on the entire life that now lay in ruins behind me. I walked down the stone steps, my heels clicking a steady, even rhythm on the wet ground. The red and blue lights of the patrol cars swept across my face, illuminating the rain on my skin, the resolve in my eyes. The lights danced, but my expression did not change. I did not smile. Fade to black. Cutscene. The end.